I was a barista fired for being too slow, standing in Marcus Rivera's cramped office behind Cafe Momentum while he tapped his gold pen against my final timesheet, his eyes already dismissing me before the words left his mouth. 3 years of opening shifts, holiday coverage, and burns from the temperamental espresso machine reduced to a single accusation that hung in the stale air like burnt coffee grounds. The tremor in my hands wasn't from caffeine withdrawal. It was pure, distilled rage threading through my veins as Marcus slid the termination paperwork across his desk, the sound of paper against faux wood grain sharp enough to cut. His manicured fingers drummed against the desk surface while I processed the bureaucratic language that essentially translated to, "You're disposable. Too slow." The phrase echoed in my skull as I watched him glance at his Rolex, a detail that should have been my first clue about the mathematical impossibility of his lifestyle on a cafe manager's salary. Behind him, framed certificates proclaimed his dedication to employee excellence and workplace integrity. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't destroying my rent prospects. I signed the papers with mechanical precision, each stroke of the pen a small death of dignity. Marcus's relief was palpable as he stood to escort me out, his hand hovering near my shoulder in a gesture that never quite made contact. The walk through the cafe felt like a perp walk, every customer's curious glance a small knife twist. Sarah, the morning shift supervisor, avoided eye contact while wiping down tables that were already clean. Jenny, barely 17 and still in her first month, watched with wide eyes from behind the register. The November air hit my face like a slap as the cafe door swung shut behind me, the familiar chime now a funeral bell. I stood on the sidewalk clutching my cardboard box of personal items, a plant that had somehow survived 3 years of cafe lighting, a thermal mug with a chip in the handle, and a small notebook where I'd been tracking something Marcus didn't know about. That notebook would become his undoing. The apartment felt smaller when I returned, unemployment stretching the walls closer together. I set the box on my kitchen table and opened the notebook, pages filled with careful observations I'd been making for months. Times, dates, discrepancies. Numbers that didn't add up when I compared my logged hours against what appeared on my pay stubs. At first, I'd assumed it was an error, payroll systems glitch. Honest mistakes happen in small businesses, but the pattern was too consistent, too carefully orchestrated. 15 minutes here, 30 minutes there. Always small enough to avoid immediate notice. Always deniable as clerical error if questioned. I'd started documenting everything 6 months ago when Jenny mentioned her hours seemed short. Then Carlos, the weekend barista, had complained about similar discrepancies. A careful review of my own records revealed the same pattern stretching back over a year. Someone was systematically shaving time from employee paychecks, banking on the fact that most baristas were too tired, too busy, or too afraid to challenge management. Now I had time. Endless, unemployed time to pursue the investigation Marcus had unknowingly handed me the freedom to complete. The first step was mapping the scope. I needed to understand exactly how widespread this was and who was benefiting. My notebook contained detailed records of my own experience, but I needed more data. The challenge was gathering information without access to the cafe's internal systems or raising suspicion among current employees who might inadvertently alert Marcus. Jenny had given me her phone number during my last week, ostensibly to cover shifts, but really because she sensed something was wrong. She was smart, observant, and still knew enough to remember what her original hire paperwork promised versus what she was actually receiving. More importantly, she was angry about it. I texted her that evening, keeping the message casual, asking how her first month was going. Her response came quickly, filled with frustration about scheduling confusion and paycheck discrepancies. She wanted to meet. We chose a diner 3 blocks from Cafe Momentum, far enough to avoid accidental encounters with management, but close enough for Jenny to reach during her break. She arrived 10 minutes late, her Cafe Momentum uniform covered by a heavy jacket, her expression tight with the kind of anxiety that comes from risking a job you can't afford to lose. She slid into the booth across from me, her movements quick and nervous. The manila folder she placed on the table contained photocopies of her timesheets, pay stubs, and original employment agreement. Her organization impressed me. This wasn't impulsive anger, but methodical documentation. The numbers were damning. Jenny's records showed a consistent pattern of time theft spanning her entire employment. The pattern matched mine exactly, strategic reductions that appeared random but followed a clear formula. Someone with access to the scheduling system was systematically stealing wages from every hourly employee. Jenny had also brought something else, a USB drive containing photos of the employee's scheduling software, taken discreetly during moments when Sarah left the back-office computer unlocked. The images showed the scheduling interface, time punch records, and most importantly, the payroll adjustment screen where someone had been manually editing hours after they were logged. As I studied the evidence, a clear picture emerged. This wasn't opportunistic theft. It was systematic fraud involving multiple levels of management. Sarah had administrative access to the scheduling system, but the payroll adjustments required manager-level permissions. Marcus wasn't just aware of the scheme, he was orchestrating it. The scope was larger than I'd initially suspected. Based on Jenny's observations and the patterns in the data, this had been running for at least 2 years, possibly longer. With an average of 8 hourly employees and wage theft totaling approximately $200 per employee per month, Marcus was stealing nearly $20,000 annually from his staff. But I needed more than suspicion and pattern recognition. I needed proof that would hold up under scrutiny, documentation that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. That meant I needed to get back inside Cafe Momentum's systems, and I needed to do it without getting caught. The plan began to crystallize over the following days. I would need inside access to the scheduling system, preferably during a time when I could document the fraud without interruption. I would need to gather evidence from multiple sources to establish the full scope of the scheme. And I would need to prepare a presentation that would force a resolution Marcus couldn't lawyer his way out of. Jenny became my inside source, though I was careful not to put her job at additional risk. She provided intelligence about management schedules, security protocols, and system access patterns. More importantly, she began quietly documenting her own time with photographs of the time clock display and written logs of her actual hours worked. Carlos, the weekend barista, was easier to approach. He'd been with the cafe for 2 years and had grown increasingly frustrated with payroll discrepancies that management consistently attributed to his own errors. When I presented him with evidence that matched his experience, his anger transformed into determination. He began his own documentation process, creating a paper trail that would corroborate the digital evidence I was gathering. The breakthrough came during Thanksgiving week. Jenny mentioned that Marcus would be out of town from Wednesday through Sunday, leaving Sarah in charge. More importantly, the cafe would be closed on Thanksgiving Day, creating a perfect window for accessing the back-office computer system without interruption. I'd been studying the cafe's security protocols through Jenny's observations. The building had a basic alarm system, but no internal cameras. The back-office computer remained logged in during business hours, protected only by the assumption that no one would access it inappropriately. Marcus's overconfidence in his own authority would become his weakness. Wednesday evening, I positioned myself across the street from Cafe Momentum, watching the closing routine. Sarah locked up at 9:30 p.m., her movements rushed as she prepared for her own holiday weekend. The building went dark, the alarm indicator blinking red in the front window. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold, the streets empty except for the occasional car heading to family gatherings. I approached the cafe from the alley, where Jenny had confirmed the back door's lock mechanism was failing. The property management company had been putting off repairs for months, and the door could be opened with sufficient pressure applied to the frame. The lock yielded after 30 seconds of careful manipulation. I slipped inside, my heart hammering against my ribs as I navigated the dark storage area toward the back office. The computer monitor glowed softly in the cramped space, the scheduling software still open from Sarah's last session. What I found exceeded my expectations. The payroll adjustment screen showed a detailed history of modifications spanning the past 18 months. Every edit was time-stamped and attributed to the user account making the change. Marcus's login credentials appeared on dozens of entries, each representing stolen wages from his employees. I photographed everything: the modification history, the original time punch records, the adjusted payroll calculations. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. But as I worked, I discovered something that transformed my understanding of the situation entirely. Marcus wasn't just stealing from his employees, he was stealing from the business itself. A secondary screen showed inventory management, and the numbers revealed a pattern of phantom purchases and inflated supplier costs. He was running 2 separate schemes: wage theft from his staff and embezzlement from the cafe's corporate owners. The corporate structure was complex, but the ownership trail led to a small restaurant group based in Chicago. Cafe Momentum was one of 12 locations, and if Marcus was running similar schemes at other sites, the total fraud could reach into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. I spent 90 minutes in that office, methodically documenting every aspect of Marcus's operation. The evidence filled 3 USB drives and over 200 photographs. When I finally left through the same back door, I carried enough proof to destroy Marcus's career and potentially send him to prison. But I wasn't finished. Raw evidence was powerful, but presentation would determine impact. I needed to create a case that would force immediate action and maximum consequences. Marcus had stolen from his employees for years, banking on their powerlessness and financial desperation. He'd counted on their inability to fight back effectively. He'd miscalculated. The next phase required transforming evidence into action. I needed to identify the most effective pressure points and sequence the revelations for maximum impact. Marcus's fraud had multiple victims: his employees, the corporate owners, and potentially the tax authorities if he was underreporting payroll expenses. I started with the employees. Using the evidence I'd gathered, I created individual reports for each staff member showing exactly how much they'd been robbed over the past 18 months. The numbers were staggering. Jenny had lost nearly $2,400, Carlos was down over $4,800, and even part-time employees were missing hundreds of dollars in wages. But I didn't distribute these reports immediately. Instead, I prepared a comprehensive presentation that would simultaneously expose the wage theft and the embezzlement. The corporate owners needed to understand that Marcus wasn't just stealing from employees. He was stealing from them too, and potentially exposing the entire business to legal liability. The presentation was 43 slides of devastating evidence: time theft documentation, payroll modification records, inventory fraud patterns, and financial impact calculations. I included screenshots of the scheduling software showing Marcus's direct involvement, photographs of discrepant timesheets, and a detailed analysis of the corporate financial exposure. The final slide was a simple calculation: total stolen wages, estimated embezzled funds, potential legal penalties, and reputation damage costs. The number was large enough to represent an existential threat to the restaurant group's viability. Finding the right contact at the corporate level required research. The restaurant group's website listed a compliance hotline and corporate address, but I needed someone with enough authority to act decisively. LinkedIn searches revealed the corporate structure, and I identified the chief operating officer and general counsel as the most appropriate recipients. I prepared 3 separate packages, one for corporate management, one for the Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division, and one for local news media. The corporate package led with financial impact and legal exposure. The Department of Labor complaint focused on systematic wage theft affecting multiple employees. The media package emphasized the human impact and corporate responsibility angles. The timing had to be perfect. I needed to ensure Marcus couldn't cover his tracks or dispose of evidence once he learned about the investigation. That meant hitting all pressure points simultaneously, creating a crisis that would overwhelm his ability to respond effectively. Friday morning, I sent the corporate package via email and overnight courier to both the COO and General Counsel. The Department of Labor complaint was filed electronically with supporting documentation uploaded to their investigation portal. The media package went to 3 local news outlets known for business reporting and consumer advocacy. Then I waited. The first response came Saturday evening. The corporate general counsel's email was brief and professional, acknowledging receipt of my complaint and requesting additional contact information for follow-up. The tone suggested serious concern rather than dismissive corporate deflection. Monday brought a phone call from a Department of Labor investigator who wanted to schedule interviews with affected employees. She'd reviewed my documentation and confirmed that it met the threshold for opening a formal investigation. More importantly, she indicated that the evidence was strong enough to pursue criminal referral if the allegations were substantiated. Tuesday morning, Jenny texted me with urgent news. Marcus had been called to a meeting with corporate management and hadn't returned to the cafe. Sarah was running the location, but she seemed nervous and had been making frequent phone calls to someone off-site. The first media story appeared Tuesday evening on a local business news website. The headline was everything I'd hoped for: local cafe manager accused of systematic wage theft. The article included details about the Department of Labor investigation and quoted the corporate general counsel expressing commitment to employee protection and full cooperation with authorities. Wednesday brought the breakthrough I'd been orchestrating. Jenny called me mid-morning with the news that Marcus had been terminated and escorted from the premises by security. Corporate representatives were on-site conducting interviews with all employees and reviewing financial records. But the most satisfying moment came Thursday afternoon. I was walking past Cafe Momentum when I saw Marcus through the window, sitting at a corner table with what appeared to be a lawyer. His face was drawn, his expensive clothes wrinkled, and his hands shook slightly as he reviewed documents spread across the table. He looked up as I passed, and our eyes met through the glass. Recognition flickered across his features, followed by understanding. He knew. In that moment, he realized exactly who had destroyed his comfortable life of theft and fraud. I didn't smile. I didn't gesture. I simply held his gaze for 3 seconds before continuing down the sidewalk. Sometimes the most devastating response is complete indifference to someone's suffering. The Department of Labor investigation moved quickly. Within 2 weeks, they'd interviewed all current and former employees, reviewed payroll records, and calculated the full scope of the wage theft. The total exceeded $35,000 over 18 months, affecting 12 employees. Marcus was personally liable for the stolen wages plus penalties and interest. The corporate investigation revealed the embezzlement scheme was even larger than I'd suspected. Marcus had been inflating supplier costs, creating phantom inventory purchases, and skimming cash deposits for over 2 years. The total fraud exceeded $180,000, representing a significant portion of the cafe's annual revenue. Criminal charges followed. The district attorney's office filed multiple felony counts: wage theft, embezzlement, fraud, and racketeering. Marcus's carefully constructed life of comfortable theft had become a nightmare of legal proceedings and financial ruin. The media coverage expanded beyond local business reporting. The story became a case study in systematic workplace fraud, with Marcus serving as the poster child for managerial abuse of power. His LinkedIn profile disappeared. His social media accounts went dark. His reputation was thoroughly and permanently destroyed. For the employees, the resolution brought more than financial recovery. The Department of Labor's investigation resulted in full restitution of stolen wages plus penalties. Jenny received a check for $3,200. Carlos got $6,400. Even part-time employees received hundreds of dollars in recovered wages. More importantly, the corporate response demonstrated that employee protection was taken seriously. New payroll systems were implemented with enhanced oversight. Management training programs were expanded to cover wage and hour compliance. The cafe became a model for proper employee treatment within the restaurant group. I received a call from the corporate general counsel 6 weeks after my initial complaint. She wanted to thank me personally for bringing the fraud to their attention and offer me the position of manager at Cafe Momentum. The irony was perfect. The job Marcus had used to steal from employees was now being offered to the person who'd destroyed him. I accepted the position, but not for the obvious reasons. Managing the cafe would give me the opportunity to rebuild the culture Marcus had poisoned with his theft and abuse. It would allow me to ensure that the systems we'd implemented actually protected employees rather than just satisfying corporate compliance requirements. My first day as manager was exactly 3 months after Marcus had fired me for being too slow. The same employees who'd watched me carry out my cardboard box of personal items now watched me unlock the same office where Marcus had conducted his schemes. The transition was seamless. I knew the operations, understood the staff dynamics, and had already earned the respect of employees who'd benefited from my investigation. More importantly, I brought a perspective that valued employee welfare over personal enrichment. Marcus's framed certificates were gone, replaced by employee recognition boards and wage and hour compliance posters. His expensive office furniture was replaced with functional pieces that emphasized accessibility rather than intimidation. The space that had once been the center of systematic theft became a symbol of employee protection. The cafe's financial performance improved dramatically under honest management. Without the drag of embezzlement and the disruption of wage theft, profits increased substantially. Employee morale soared as trust in management was restored. Customer satisfaction ratings reached all-time highs as staff members felt valued and protected. 6 months after taking over as manager, I received notification that Marcus had pleaded guilty to all charges. The plea agreement included full restitution, community service, and 18 months in prison. His professional reputation was destroyed, his financial assets were seized, and his future career prospects were essentially eliminated. The most satisfying detail was contained in a footnote of the legal documents. Marcus's sentence required him to complete community service specifically related to worker protection and wage theft prevention. The man who'd spent years stealing from employees would spend his community service hours educating others about the very crimes he'd committed. Justice had been served, but not through the traditional employment law process that favors employers with resources and legal representation. Instead, it had been delivered through methodical investigation, strategic documentation, and coordinated pressure that made Marcus's position untenable. The notebook that had started as a simple record of discrepancies had become the foundation for dismantling an entire criminal enterprise. The careful observations and detailed documentation I'd maintained during months of wage theft had provided the evidence necessary to pursue criminal prosecution rather than just civil recovery. Marcus had fired me for being too slow, but his real mistake was underestimating the patience and determination of someone who'd been systematically robbed for years. He'd assumed that employee powerlessness was permanent, that theft could continue indefinitely without consequences. He'd been catastrophically wrong. Standing in the office that had once been his sanctuary of fraud, I opened the same desk drawer where he'd kept his gold pen. Inside, I placed the original notebook that had documented his crimes. A reminder of the price of underestimating the people you choose to victimize. The cafe thrived under honest management. Employees earned every dollar they worked for. Corporate profits were legitimate rather than subsidized by theft. The community received the kind of service that's only possible when workers are treated with dignity and respect. And somewhere in the city, Marcus Rivera was learning that the consequences of systematic theft extend far beyond termination paperwork and unemployment benefits. He was discovering that some people, when pushed far enough, possess the patience and determination to pursue justice through every available channel. I was never too slow. I was methodical, thorough, and ultimately unstoppable. Marcus's biggest mistake wasn't the theft itself, it was choosing the wrong person to steal from. He'd fired the one employee who had the skills, motivation, and time necessary to destroy everything he'd built through years of criminal behavior. The gold pen was gone, sold to pay legal fees. The expensive office furniture had been repossessed. The reputation, career, and comfortable life had been systematically dismantled with the same precision he'd used to steal from his employees. In the end, Marcus Rivera learned that being too slow was never the problem. The problem was being too careless, too confident, and too cruel to realize that some injustices create enemies patient enough to pursue total destruction. I was exactly slow enough.